All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. If I looked correctly, it's 6:30. My name's John Hutchison. I'm the Deputy Superintendent here at the school district. And thank you for coming out and listening a little bit about our budget realignment process that we're going through right now. This evening, if you want to ask any questions, probably the most organized way we thought to do it is if you would just email them into this email address. Our communications group will take a look at those, get them up to me after the presentation, try to group similar ones just so we can be really efficient with that. If we don't get to your question, know that they're going to be logging them down and we'll be creating an FAQ for our website. So that's another avenue. And if you think of something later on, you can always use this email and we'll once again get to the question and get it answered for you. So before I get into all the details, it's important for everyone to really kind of frame and understand our school district. You know, we're a massive system. So you hear a lot of big numbers, but we're the largest district in the metro area. We're the second largest in Kansas. Overall, we have a $500 million budget. Our operating budget is over $300 million. Payroll for a month's nearly $30 million. Our other bills run anywhere from $5 to $8 million a month. We have thousands of codes and thousands of transactions that we touch every day. And the way we do that is, unfortunately, I have to give you just a little bit of a school finance lesson for you to kind of understand some of the challenges that we've faced. We have 27 different funds and 31 different funding sources in our school district. And of those 31 sources, 12 of them are restricted, meaning that they're for very specific use. There's a lot of strings attached to how you can spend them. Another 12 are what I call semi-restricted sources, which only leaves 7 that we really can utilize in any fashion that we see fit. What you see on the screen is all 31 of those sources. And the sources in red are things that we cannot include in what's called our local option budget. And I'm going to say a couple terms that you won't understand right away, but I'll get to it in just a minute. So the red ones don't get included in our local option budget. The ones that are in black are part of our legal maximum budget, another term that I'll explain in just a moment. The W's represent weightings, and they're going to play a really critical part in tonight's conversation. A weighting is recognition that not every student's created equal. So some students require additional funding. For example, a CTE student, let's say they're in a welding program, the equipment's going to be a lot more expensive than a traditional classroom. Therefore, the state provides additional funding, a half student's worth of additional funding for a CTE program. That's called a weighting. When I talk about something being restricted, as I said, you have to use it for a very specific purpose. If it's semi-restricted, you have flexibility to spend it on salaries or supplies, but you can't deviate from the category. For example, driver's ed salaries can't go to general ed classrooms and vice versa. The asterisks indicate 7 of our 8 levies. In our district, we levy 8 different taxes. And what a levy is measured by a mill, and you won't understand the definition, but it's 1 mill raises $1 for every $1,000 of assessed valuation. So districts levy mills. And these are the 8 that we do. Across all of Kansas, it's mandatory that every district levy 20 mills. In addition to that, they can go up to about, you'll see about 33% of a particular number that I'll show you in just a moment. They can do what's called a local option budget. And we utilize that. In addition, we use another levy that I have highlighted called the Board of Tax Appeals, or it's also known as extraordinary growth. For fast-growing districts, they can levy a tax that, for example, when Olathe West opened, we could levy a tax to raise 100% of its operating costs for 2 years. Then in the third year, it could go down to 95%. Then it goes down to 70, and it clicks down by 15% a year till you get no funding for that new school. We can also levy a tax for what's called cost of living adjustment. We live in Johnson County. Our average home price is higher than that of the average home price in Kansas. So we're allowed to levy an additional tax in order to try and attract and retain staff. We have a special assessment levy, It's a small one, and it's kind of declining. Back in the day, we had more benefit districts in our boundaries. A benefit district is where kind of all the landowners have to put the infrastructure in together, and we participate in those as well. The next one is a special liability levy, and that's for basically when the district gets sued. It's a small levy because in Kansas, there is a tort limit to how much you can sue a school district. The maximum is $250,000. So generally, no claim can exceed that. The second to last one is capital outlay, and it's limited to be 8 mills across the state, and we are at that 8 mil mark, and that raises capital for equipment and repairs and things like that. And you'll see a little more about that in just a moment. And the final one is bond and interest. And bond and interest goes to pay off our bonds for when we sell a bond for construction purposes. So you notice those top 4 are all levies that kind of go towards creating an operating fund for us. Those bottom 4 are much more specific, and they, like I said, have real special uses. Otherwise, the other ones kind of all really go up to the state and come back to us in a funding formula. So school finance in Kansas can be very complicated. And when you're one of the largest districts in the area and you have 28,000 budget codes, it gets complicated very quickly. But I'm going to try and explain how our state aid works in the simplest way I know possible. So it's not the exact calculation, that's actually about 4 pages long, but in its simplest form, this is the way we receive our funding, or mainly our operating funding. The basis for it is something called BASE, and BASE is the base aid for student excellence. And it's an amount, it's $4,076 this year. And you multiply that by your enrollment, but it's not your current enrollment, which is going to play a part this evening. It's last year's enrollment, or it's the second preceding year's enrollment. You add to that those student weightings I mentioned. There's a variety of them. We're a high enrollment, we get a little extra weighting. Bilingual students need additional services, so we get weightings for them. We get an at-risk weighting, which will definitely play a role this evening. And then we have some other funding, we call them other funding weightings. They actually have a calculation of their own, but they get slipped into this formula for a very good reason. And that's where that Board of Tax Appeals is. So you add all that up, that's called our general fund legal maximum budget. When I was in Missouri, if we ran into a budget challenge, I could go out to our public and ask for a tax increase. You can't do that in the state of Kansas. Everything is driven by that formula to make it very equitable across the state regardless of where a student lives. But as I mentioned earlier, we do have the ability to raise more locally, up to 33% of that number. That's called our local option budget. And that together creates all of the operating funding for our school district. So I've heard this question a lot lately. How did we get here, and why didn't we see it coming? And I'm going to try and explain that through some of those variables I just mentioned. So imagine it's 2019-20, before COVID hit. I'm telling you, we did see some of it coming. Probably for several years, I stood at a podium at board meetings explaining, BOTA is going to go away. We're not growing the way we were. We're not opening new buildings. So at that point in time, this is what we saw. We saw that come 21-22, this year, we were going to lose about $1.3 million of that funding. Easy enough to prepare for. By 23-24, it would grow to 13.1 million. And 8 years from now, when it's finally all done, it would max out at $26.6 million reduction. That's if we never build another new school again. And honestly, it will be some time before we'll need an additional school. Replacement schools don't help with that particular weighting. Some of the things we didn't see coming until COVID. Enrollment decline. So next year, that variable is going to kick in our district. Remember I said you point to the previous year or 2 years back? COVID's been going on 2 years. We've been pointing to 2019 for our funding. I can no longer do that. And so it's going to equate to about a $6.3 million reduction if kids do not come back, if we don't see additional growth. And we're really not seeing that right now. Historically, we have grown every year since consolidation of school districts in Kansas in 1965. When COVID hit was the first year we had any kind of decline. And in school finance, funding is all about growth. I don't want to say it trickles in if you don't grow, but it's much smaller than if you're a growing school district. So what's happened the last 3 years is in 2019-20, we were at 29,287 funded full-time equivalent students. A little different than enrollment, but I'm not going to get into the definitions. These are all three comparable numbers. In 2021, that dropped by 900 students. In 21-22, we only gained back 62. So the big question is, what's going to happen next year? If, fingers crossed, COVID is finally done, where we thought it might rebound, where did those kids go? Where are they? They didn't come back this year. So that is that's what's layering on that additional reduction in our funding. And in 2019, we wouldn't have seen that. Are we sure what the future is going to hold for us growth-wise? No. Every district's struggling to figure out, what was that impact of COVID? Are they in the private schools? Are they going to come back? Where did they move to? We seem to be building houses. Where are the kids? So it's going to take a few years to really kind of have a track record of exactly where we're at. The next piece was waiting losses. In addition to the students not being here, there's students that had waitings. Two significant waitings relate to Olathe Virtual School and that at-risk waiting I mentioned. We lost about $1 million in at-risk funding. I saw a social media post wanting to know why the district didn't file the proper paperwork to receive their at-risk funding. Well, here's how it works. Parents have to file for that. It's the National School Lunch Program. They file for a free or a reduced lunch, and then their child eats free. That was pre-COVID. When COVID hit, they went to the summer lunch program. Everybody eats free. I don't have to fill out any paperwork. All our students are eating for free. Not on the district's money. The federal government was providing us the funding that we needed for that, but there wasn't an impetus to fill out the paperwork anymore. So they moved to a home economic survey, and we communicated and communicated and communicated for families to please fill it out or we lose this waiting. But if your child's eating every day, you just don't quite have the motivation. So they didn't fill out the paperwork, and we lost about $1 million. The other piece relates to Olathe Virtual School. And I'll get into more details on Olathe Virtual School in a few minutes. But basically, if you're a virtual student, remember how I said each student gets at least $4,706? If you're a virtual student, you get $5,000, but you get no waitings. 40% of the student body of Olathe Virtual School had waitings. So we ended up losing about another $1.5 million in waiting revenue that we would have anticipated. We had no virtual school in 2019 as we were looking at this. The next piece is special education. We transfer a significant amount of our general fund to special education each year. Unfortunately, it's been growing of late. We have more and more special needs students, which is not a bad thing, but the state of Kansas funds special education. It's supposed to be funded at 92% of something called excess cost. It is currently funded at about 59 to 60%. That is causing districts who have great special ed programs and a growing population to have to provide more funding from their general fund to support their special ed programs. Just this week, Johnson County superintendents sent a letter to Governor Kelly asking to fully fund it because the state has a surplus. That is a big thing for us. That's $15 million if they would just fully fund special education to that 92% level. So, and then finally, compensation. Back in 2021, We provided compensation. We were in the second year of a 2-year agreement with our certified licensed staff. It costs more than we had anticipated. There's a variety of reasons. People can get across the columns and it costs a little more, but okay, that's usually a minor adjustment to make. However, this past year, we increased by $6.7 million in compensation as well. So combined, let me explain a little bit for those of you who don't know how teacher compensation works. Most school districts in America have a salary schedule. There is credit granted for years of experience, and there is credit granted for level of education. And now last year, I've heard, I don't know how to delicately say this, I've heard there were no increases. For the district, there was a cost. Depending on where you are on the schedule, perhaps there was no increase, or there was a bigger increase. But for the district, the cost was $2.2 million for step movement and $2.6 million for column movement. That combined to 3%. I was asked the question once, how come you waited to disclose the 3% increases to administrators until after we settled with teachers? We always wait until we've settled with teachers to announce the other increases. But the 3% really represents that combined compensation or cost of the entire salary schedule to the district. We do a like percentage generally to administration and to our classified staff. In addition, we held the health rates down. There were Esser-funded stipends that were provided. So all in all, the compensation was more around 4%. So why'd you do that? You don't have enough money. You already saw you had a problem with salaries. Well, we had a plan. First of all, we have to retain and attract teachers. So increases are good. Usually most staff likes that. The biggest thing is we had a plan. And the plan was, you see that $19.6 million sitting there. Although we projected that that would be our deficit, we knew we were going to receive what's called Esser 3 funds. Another question I hear a lot about, you guys should be rich. You got so much Esser funds. I've been reading the newspapers, you got a ton. There are 3 pieces to Esser. Esser 1 came last year, and it was $1.7 million. It predominantly went to PP&E equipment, that's a mouthful, and also for some stipends to create some of the remote learning materials. Later that year, we were awarded $8.5 million of Esser 2 funds, and that was for a 2-year period. Our application was to enhance summer school the first summer. It was to create reading and math coaches, extra counselors, ELL support in order to regain any learning loss that may have happened during COVID. Those we knew full well, if we can't absorb those people back into the system after that, those positions may not continue on. This year, they announced Esser 3. We received $18.6 million in Esser 3, and I say receive loosely. We filed in July. We have just gotten the state board approval a month ago, and I still don't have our funds. I'm hopeful we have them before June 30th, because that's when they're due to us. It sounds like a lot of money. It was a plan to get us delayed 1 year before and get us time to really analyze how do we want to realign this budget. But to put it in comparison, Wichita, the largest school district in Kansas, at about 42,000 students, received $300 million. KCK School District, at 22,000 students, not too much smaller than us, $18 million. I did say 300 million, not 1,000, right? It's 300 million Wichita. So it's all based on Title I populations, but there's a great inequity, and I'm not faulting anyone, it's just the facts. Blue Valley has far less than us, and they're having some challenges as well. So the Esser funds is what aided us in gaining that year. So typically for a budget our size, one of these items would cause no concern, but combined they create a bit of a perfect storm for us. And we're not alone. Other districts are having budget challenges, but granted, ours is much more complicated because we had all these factors hit all at once. Had COVID not hit, we wouldn't be here tonight. We'd make adjustments. We have 150 to 200 staff members leave our district every year. That's called attrition. And attrition would just take its course, and we'd make some adjustments to other budgets, and we'd be on our way. Another complicating factor for us is we run fairly lean. There's not a lot of low-hanging fruit. And I'm not saying the other districts have it, but some do. Or they have larger balances for a variety of reasons. I can tell you our two neighboring districts have more capital outlay budget than we do because they have a higher valuation, so they can raise more. One of them raises $10 million more. They're smaller than us each year in capital outlay. And you'll see why that helps in a moment. We can shift several types of salaries over into capital outlay, freeing up funds in our general fund. So, once we identify these challenges, how are we going to realign our budget? So at this point, just let's kind of forget all of that school funding and the formulas and stuff, and let's make it even more simple. Let's say our funding really falls into three buckets. We've got a bond bucket, we got a capital outlay bucket, and if you saw a bond presentation, you've seen the bucket speech. We have an operating bucket. The first thing we looked at, or you would logically think we would look at, is the bond funds. We just passed authority for $298.3 million for the bonds. The problem is it is illegal to spend it on salaries. It has to go to capital items. And just because there's a lot of splitting hairs these days, I'm going to qualify that. If you are dedicated 100% to running our construction projects, I can put you in there. Even our executive director is not 100% dedicated to running our projects. He has other job duties. If he has a fraction of something else to do, I can't put him here. That's the only exception in the bond world. So that's off the table. We then look at our capital outlay fund and see what can we do there. It's smaller, $37.3 million, and I'm using actual figures from last year because I don't want to debate about is that budgeted figure right or not. These are known. These are audited figures, so that's what I'm basing this on. You'll see a variety of things that we purchase out of capital outlay. We purchase software, some supplies. We have leases for our bus, even though they're operated by a third party. We buy some furniture out of there. We have our custodial maintenance salaries in there. And then this is what we lean on for our minor repairs. But if that green and that gray piece that totals $18.2 million, had the bond issue not passed, maybe not this year, but next year I'd have to start sliding that back over to the operating bucket. So thank God the bond passed, because it does allow us to at least keep these expenses over there. But there's not much room in here for anything else. So that's not a long-term solution. So with that frame in mind, we knew we have to look at our operating bucket to come up with the savings. And so when we do that, we kind of prioritize around four things, and they go in this order. The first thing we look for is non-personnel costs. But it does take some amount of cost to run a school district this big. We then look at district level supports. Is there anything we can do more efficiently with a few less people, a different way? Then we go to the school supports. Then we go down to teachers and class size. It's kind of a spiral in and try and protect that core. So our senior leaders and principals for the last 9 months, looking at budgets, trying to figure out how can we do this? How can we realign it to our resources? How can we realign it to and still fulfill some of the goals of the strategic plan and work down that priority? We came up in broad categories with these particular pieces. We adjusted department and school budgets by 25% and academy budgets by 50%. In consultation, everybody thought they could get to a 25% reduction in order to save some staff. Why are the academies double? Quite honestly, at the end of every year, there seems to be a rush to try and spend out the academy budgets. They're pretty well funded. That one we may have to back off on, but the goal is to try and see if they can give a really quality program, a great student experience, and not have such a large non-personnel budget involved, unlike many of our other programs in the district. Then we have some program evaluation with some focus on our strategic goals. PBIS coaches, can we do with less of them? It's a great initiative, it's a perfect program, it's something we're committed to, but can we do it differently? Can we do it with less? The whole key was to try to not eliminate any program at this point. Try to figure out the best way to continue with them. Then we aligned our support staff work schedules and staffing based on the various levels, elementary, middle, and high school, and the size of their building. We had great disparity among, I'll say, office staff. Between each elementary, each high school, each middle school, what role do they play? How many do you need? When's the tripping point? So that was discussed and determined, here's the size that we need in each one of our schools and each level. Now we're kind of going down that list more. We get into the elimination of kindergarten aide positions. Kindergarten aides were part of when we had fee-based full-day kindergarten. And if you think back, there was a lot less students that went through a preschool program at that time. But once the state fully funded, we were supposed to keep them on just till we get to the next year so that the aides could find a different employment. Fast forward, they've been in the system a few years now. Therefore, it was determined that we would eliminate that position. Our neighbors do not have that position, and we really don't have a lot of those types of supports in our other general ed classrooms. We eliminated the secondary library aide positions. At the elementary library, the aides needed because the library is part of the specials rotation. And plus, little folks need a little more assistance in selecting books than our secondary counterparts. And because, not demeaning in any way, the libraries at the secondary level are more of a resource versus part of that rotation. It was determined at this point that at the secondary level, we could eliminate those positions and hold on the elementary. Then we align class sizes, staying within our staffing standards. And I'll talk a little bit about that just in a moment. And finally, the closure of our Olathe virtual school. So let's take a deeper dive into this operating and what the impact of those decisions are. So this is how our operating fund works. We have $320 million in it. And I think you can see the labels. We pay our utilities, we pay teacher salaries, we pay classified salaries, we pay administrator salaries, we have some supplies and materials. But the most significant thing is 88.2% of this bucket is compensation. There is no way to realign a budget without touching people. So it's unavoidable. It's the only way. We are a labor-intensive industry. So let's take a look at those salaries a little more. This is how they divide out by the main categories. You've got certified licensed, you've got your admin, and you've got your classified. I want to talk a little bit about that 15.1. That represents every assistant principal, every assistant director, all the way up to the superintendent. I've seen several comments that say, just get rid of all the administrators and you'll solve this problem. I can get rid of the entire school administration and all of us, and we still don't reach the realignment that we have to do. Also, at a district level, we are the second lowest district level administrative cost per pupil in the state. So we run fairly lean at that level. Not so much at the school level. It's not because we're inefficient that we just kind of spend on school administrators. A decision was made decades ago to use neighborhood schools at the elementary level. In other parts of Kansas and other states, you might see an elementary with 1,000 kids. We didn't go with that model. So it's very difficult. There's a lot of administration at the school level. That's not a right or wrong, it's just a decision. And in order to solve that, would take a much longer and deeper discussion with our public about consolidating schools and making some of them larger. That's the only way to make inroads into that particular piece. But at our district level staffing, which is, so forget about those school principals and stuff, but at the district level, we were able to achieve over $1.5 million or 11.5% of that $13 million budget that's district level staffing. So that's been reduced. On the classified staffing, the things I mentioned in the list, it's about 9.6% reduction or $4.0 million. And finally, in the certified area, that makes up, that pie is about $172 million. It's a 6.2% reduction or $11 million. Most of that reduction, unlike some of the other areas, are a result of attrition. There are several positions I can count on my hands that were not through attrition, and attrition is people leaving the system. However, I want to be real clear. That doesn't mean that there won't be movement that we have every year, because people may have left in the wrong area, and we'll have to transfer to balance it out. But we were, from a strategic plan standpoint, we're already inequitable in how the staffing patterns were across many of the schools. Even with those certified reductions, we'll still have an elementary pupil-teacher ratio under 20, we'll have middle school under 25, and we'll have high school under 30. Let's talk about OVS a little bit. OVS was a $3.2 million investment, and it was put in for the right reasons. The problem is, the challenge was replicating a really high-quality school in a virtual setting. I mentioned those kids with waitings leaving. In the end, we lost $2.7 million through OVS. We didn't have the participation. We didn't get the waitings for them. It was a transition for families while we were in COVID. We were hoping it could be very sustainable, but it's an unsustainable program or building or school. And therefore, we're not going to be offering that next year. We still have work to do going forward. We're done for this year. But next year, we need to spend the year looking at a few other items that we need more public input. Because as I said, unlike other districts, we didn't really go after programmatic change. So a lot of this was handled through administration. But we need to study middle school. It's a great program, great model, not the cheapest model. Is there any way we can get more efficient there? Is there some adjustment to the teaming we can make? Is there anything we can do with the electives? Bell times is another place where you can save over $1 million. Can we separate the bell times enough that one bus can take elementary, then go get middle, then go get high school? Maybe we can, maybe we can't. But it's going to take a deeper discussion with staff and the public. High school offerings, not to pick on English, we have 78 electives in English. Do we need to look at doing that more efficiently? Do we need each and every one of them or not? Are kids utilizing them? And then we have to study special ed. We just have to figure out, is there anything we can do more efficient there to slow down that ever-increasing costs that we run into in the special ed world. So in closing, before we get to additional questions, please know none of this is easy. I have 2 daughters that teach in this system. My kids went to this system. I moved here 15 years ago and absolutely love Olathe. So I've spent a lot of sleepless nights trying to figure out how to be the knight in shining armor and come up with a solution. but it's all sitting in compensation. Not that you don't deserve every dime of it, it's just we are a labor-intensive group. And unfortunately, we don't have the luxury that maybe past administrations and superintendents had, that we are fast-growing, so if it's off a little bit this year, just hang in there because we're going to get 1,000 kids next year, and the money will be there. And then we'll do the same thing the next year. Declining and at best flat enrollment prevents us from waiting any longer. More money from growth isn't really going to be coming. I've often said that, this is the little district that got big, and I liked that little feel. However, we have a lot of characteristics and run our district a lot of times like a small district. Now that we're big, we have to look at everything. Everything we put in place was good for kids. Not everything is the highest priority for kids. We're going to have to go through some really hard prioritization of what we do, because we can't afford everything we're doing right now, and we have to make sure that this district is fiscally sound, or we're going to lose all credibility with our public. So nobody likes to hear me stand up here and talk money and how we have to reduce, but it's a necessary part of operating a school district. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. To start with, why are we facing these cuts when other districts are not?
Basically, I mentioned some of the points. Some districts have capital outlay funds they can rely on. They may not have faced weighting losses as we did. They may not have increasing special ed costs that are causing a transfer. The variables, as I said, there's a lot of variables that go into each district, and they're very unique. So I know many of them are struggling in this area with slowed growth. Some of the traditional ones of Blue Valley, than us that used to grow, now it's the Spring Hill that's growing, and groups like that.
How did the district decide where you're going to make cuts, especially in staffing?
Like I said, it was sort of that tiered approach that I walked down. We tried to start with non-personnel type items. Then we moved on to more district level type supports, school supports, and then finally you land in the classroom. And just kind of keep going through those priorities, trying to figure out what's the least impact. Can we preserve a program but just do it with less people? Just keep walking through that list of 4 items. I don't know why I'm looking at you as you read them, but...
The Olathe community just voted to approve a $298.3 million bond. Why can't we just use these funds to help with budget deficits?
As I said, the big green circle, it's illegal to use it for salaries. It has to go to capital type items.
What would have happened had we not passed the bond?
That's where I pointed those 2 pie shapes. Can't remember now, $18 million worth would have to start shifting back over to operating funds, because there would be necessary repairs. There would be we'd have to free up some of that fund in order to handle some of the technology replacements.
Why did the district wait to tell the public about the budget deficit until after the bond passed?
Besides just trying to determine exactly the plan, they really ran on 2 different tracks, but at the same time, it was a major component. If it didn't pass, we're suddenly looking at far deeper cuts in each one of the categories we cut. So you have to see if that passes or not. It is transparent. I've been standing at a podium for 3 years talking about BOTA going away. And until we have certain information, our legislature is not even out of session yet. We don't know our funding for next year. But we can't wait any longer. So we waited to the last possible time we could in order to allow some of that classified staff to seek out other positions within the district where they could stay with us, but in a different capacity. We waited as long as possible to figure out how many teachers are going to retire, how many are going to be transferring out of the district, so we can make room and not have to go into a RIF, which we got fairly close, and we're not going to do a RIF. We will figure it out from this point.
Who is involved in making decisions about budget cuts?
Who was involved? Senior leaders, principals. I'm not sure if other staff got involved in those or not at this point.
Kind of in the vein of 2 questions ago, why did we wait so long to tell people about job eliminations and the timing of that?
That was strictly just working through the process.
Okay, this is a question about salaries. If salaries for next year have not yet been finalized, can we as a district commit to a 0% increase in these salaries or a universal pay cut for all staff?
I can't unilaterally do that. We could discuss that in negotiations with teachers, but I can't just say it's going to be 0 right now. That's a conversation we have in negotiations. So I'd say that's a no. Can't commit to. We have to go through that process.
There was a question that was emailed in about when you were talking about the salary schedule and the percent increase. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe go back to that slide.
Sure. There it was. So that step movement, where you grant 1 more year of credit, degree movement is column movement. As people gain degrees, they move across. Those 2 numbers add up to roughly 2.9% and some change. That's where we came up with the 3% for other staff. And then when I said it's about 4% overall, it's the health, the additional cost to the district for the health insurance and the stipend that's one time that was paid through Esser, but it provided, I think it was $850 for certified and $600 classified, I don't recall.
We have a few questions about salaries, so I'm going to try to ask them now. Will certified licensed staff still be able to move across the pay scale?
Unless we would negotiate something different in our salary schedule, yes.
What will happen to
Maybe I can clarify all of that. Until we go through a negotiation process, nothing can change in that salary schedule. The structure can't change. We have to have a conversation about where we head through that schedule. So as far as saying, well, we're going to freeze that up, we're going to do this, we can't do that. We're obligated to have a negotiation with teachers.
What will happen to voluntary early retirement in the future?
The way it works is the Board of Education would have to notify a year and ahead of time that it would be going away, and at this point, that hasn't been addressed by the board.
In general, why has the district approved any raises over the past few years if budget cuts were a concern?
The concern over just retention and recruitment, we're falling behind the other districts. So when we saw the ESSER 3 funds, we could maintain class size and get ourselves another year to try to figure out how to handle any future challenges and see how we emerge from COVID. Do our kids come back or not? That's why we did it.
We have had quite a few questions about ESSER. Would you mind just talking briefly again about how ESSER funds were spent?
Sure. ESSER 1 predominantly is PPE, or like masks and sanitation type things. There were stipends involved in it for the development of remote learning materials, and that was the 1.7 million total. So it was kind of a small piece. ESSER 2 was over 8 million, and ESSER 2 provided some of the PBIS coaches, MTSS, some of the interventions, some expanded summer school in year 1, and some of these are 2 years. We divided it and said, we want these interventions in place for 2 years So it's predominantly staffing. A lot of districts went into the heating and cooling business with Esser funds. It's totally allowed. We wanted to try and channel it into classrooms versus doing equipment, which is what, because we knew we were going to be running a bond issue. And then the Esser 3 is the one where two things. It was retention and recruitment stipends and maintain class size. So it was all salary oriented so that we could solve this year's problem. Otherwise, we would have been facing this last year in the middle of COVID, trying to reduce and hope enough people retired and enough attrition happened when kids needed as much staff as possible.
We have a couple special education questions.
Okay.
If the state doesn't fully fund special education, is that more debt on top of the more than 20 million, or is that included?
No, it's included. It would relieve us immensely from any future actions if it were to be funded.
If more students are being identified with special education needs, how are we going to meet their needs with little money?
That's where I mentioned that we're going to be trying to do some assessments, whether we bring somebody in from the outside to just look at our overall programs. Are there any ways we can do it more efficiently? Because you have an obligation to serve.
There are some questions about class size
Okay.
that you mentioned. How are class sizes going to remain low? You mentioned class sizes of 20. Can you just talk a little bit about class sizes?
Sure, that's the average pupil-teacher ratio. Yes, some would be higher, some would be lower. Like at elementary, I didn't see a PTR above 19, even with the changes there. Does that mean there's a class of 24 somewhere? Yes. It's an averaging. At middle school, they've moved from about, I think, 21 or 22 to 24. And then at high school, it's much harder to measure, but they're in the upper 20s, and we've seen they won't go over 30. But that's going to be hard to maintain going forward. That's why we want to look at some of the elective courses as well, see if we can balance the students out more.
Has the administrative level been affected by budget cuts, and if so, how?
Yes, we have, there are some administrative cuts, administrative support, district level support. That's that $1.5 million. That's at 11%.
We had quite a few questions about the Olathe virtual school. So let's just talk again about why the district decided to close the Olathe virtual school and how this helps with the budget challenges.
I hate to be cold and financial about a school, but the staffing that it takes to run that school versus the 300 students it attracted is not sustainable. It's losing nearly $3 million a year in its first year. The question of, could you expand it? Could you offer it across the county? We haven't seen programs be successful in that. There are some very great, large, attended virtual schools, but it's basically for districts kind of a moneymaker. They take the money, they get the funding, but they turn them over to kind of an online school. We were trying to do it right, kind of copy what we do in our schools in a virtual setting, and that's what made it inefficient. The commissioner even said, I think Dr. Yeager asked, what should we do? What do other districts do? And he said, you're doing it right. That's why you're losing money. We just couldn't identify a fix for it.
One other question related to the Olathe virtual school. If we knew that the funding was going to be a flat $5,000 per student, why did we open it to begin with?
We didn't realize how many, that 40% of the student body would have weightings attached to them, and therefore we would not receive those additional funds to help balance that. We thought our enrollment would be much higher, which would also have helped balance that, but those two factors didn't come to fruition.
John, would you mind putting back up the slide that has the email address?
Oh, certainly.
One question we received, what are we doing to attract or retain students?
Oops. Sorry about that. I went racing. Ryan, can you just put up the email address for me? Thanks. To attract students, that's an interesting question. We have not really done that. The open enrollment, we have not really tried to recruit from our borders of Spring Hill or other districts at this point. That might be a possibility that we look at, but there's some challenges there too. And I don't mean this mean. What if the gates are opened and because we have an outstanding special education program, we're already having challenges in that arena, we have more special education students come.
Okay. Are there other areas where we have made cuts other than staffing? Some of the suggestions were, what about eliminating sports, extracurriculars, or closing one of our elementary schools with low attendance?
Those are great topics, and those could be added to the list of those other items that we're going to be looking at next year. We can definitely look at reduction of sports, C and D level. We could look at, do you want to consolidate schools and close schools? We'll kind of be turning every rock. At this point, I'm not sure if people are up for school closure or not, but we'll definitely find out.
Was Mastery Connect on the table to be cut?
Everything was on the table to be cut, but in the discussions, it wasn't time for that one to go yet.
Sorry, there's a lot of questions.
Okay.
I was trying to juggle. Are the 21st Century Academies funded differently than general education? Is more money granted for academy students and non-academy students?
The academies have additional funding into their budgets. That's why we looked at a 50% reduction versus the 25 at the other levels.
How are those that have had their jobs eliminated in the district being helped by the district?
HR department has been working with individuals to try and identify other positions within the district. Obviously, it may not be a like position. It could be in a different department, but I know Dr. Sig and her staff have been working with a lot of individuals.
Are there changes coming to benefits, i.e. monthly premiums?
Once again, that's a negotiable item. So we'll have every year we have discussions about compensation, which is the salary structure, benefits. So we'll have those discussions there. I've not assumed that they have in projecting where we're going to land. It's business as usual in my projections.
How do our administrator salaries at the Ed Center and IRC compare to our neighboring districts?
It's kind of individual basis. Some compare well, some compare poorly, and it's true in every class of employee in this school district. And even among the salary schedule, we do really great at a mid-year career. We don't do so well at a starting teacher salary. So some, like I said, some compare very well and some don't.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about enrollment numbers. We've had a couple questions about enrollment. Okay. Previously, the district projected a growing student population that does not seem to have come to fruition. Can you please address why the projections were inaccurate?
COVID. We showed projections of about 100 to 150. As I said, we dropped by 900. We only saw 62 come back this past year. We're a little apprehensive to say we're out of the woods and suddenly we're going to get 500 kids next year. We saw it slowing before, so it would be a surprise if we suddenly have some massive growth. Now, there are areas that are growing. Don't get me wrong, the west side of town is growing. I would love the day that everybody sells their house on the east side of town because they've been staying in them a while and there's no kids coming out of them. But we're not there. Communities tend to roll over, and that has not occurred on our east part of our town, and I'm not sure if it will as rates start to rise.
This was a question about the enrollment numbers that were on the screen. Can you explain why the enrollment numbers shown tonight are different than the district count on the website?
Because these are funded FTE, not an enrollment. This is converted to a full-time equivalent-based funding, and those were the historical numbers that are audited from 2 years back and last year, so I know they're accurate.
I'm jumping around, sorry. Back to bond.
Yes.
Can items be removed from the bond to help with budget?
No. Once again, everything in that bond is keeping pressure off of the operating funds. Otherwise, we would have to find additional reductions.
How many staff members are leaving this year?
Teacher-wise, it was 140. Classified, I don't recall. I'd be happy to put that in an answer on the FAQ, kind of quantify those.
You mentioned an 11.5% reduction in staffing. Does this include certified staff that haven't been cut yet?
No, it's 11.5% of that district level staff. In the certified realm, there are no more reductions in any classification this year. Unless people leave on their own accord, we'll try to gather that savings for next year. So we may not replace if somebody leaves now. It makes the picture even better.
This is kind of back to enrollment. What will happen when and if families leave the district? So if our enrollment drops again, what happens?
If, then we receive less funding and we have to tighten up more.
What steps are being taken to prevent this from happening next year and the year after?
Hopefully no more pandemics hit, because now that that's out of our system, we're assuming no enrollment growth, so keeping it flat. We've made all of these adjustments to kind of help right size, and our weightings are already down, so we assume everything's adjusted down. And now we just have maintained, we used to do all kinds of regression analysis and try and guess how many more at risk are we going to get and how many more bilingual. We've remained flat so that we have a very conservative outlook, and hopefully we'll be pleasantly surprised.
Are Title I funds impacted?
No.
Do we have money in reserves?
Yes. We have a special ed reserve, a contingency reserve. Not as large as they once were, but it is a cushion in case anything were to occur.
Why are we hiring elementary assistant principals?
We are hiring because it's getting harder and harder and harder and harder to find good quality principals. We thrust a lot of teachers straight into a principalship, and we've determined we need to have some assistant principals at our elementary level in order to have a bit, kind of a training ground as we have turnover in our elementary ranks. It goes to that strategic plan alignment discussion.
Okay, so why didn't the district choose to build a school to relieve Manchester Park and Clearwater Creek so we could get more money from building a new school instead of rebuilding Santa Fe Trail?
Because you have to fill them too. You have to staff them. So it's not quite that clear cut that just because you build it, you can go do this levy. It's 100% of the operating costs. So if you split a school too early, their operating costs aren't very high, and you're not reaping any additional funding. And now you just kick the can down the road another 8 years, which is kind of the problem we're in, that we've always relied on that funding source. So it'd be much better that that becomes extra one day to do special short-term programs versus rely on it for salary schedules and benefits.
Have we considered redoing our boundaries?
Our district boundaries?
Yes, in terms, I assume they mean...
Or school boundaries?
School boundaries, yeah.
We haven't, but that'll be something on the table. We have some capacity on the east side versus the west side. The problem is it's mainly in elementary. It's very difficult to drag elementary kids across railroad tracks, Santa Fe, larger streets like that. But we'll definitely be looking at it to see if, especially if we were to consider any kind of consolidation of schools.
How are maintenance and tech costs budgeted each year, and how is this funded with aging infrastructure and stagnant growth?
That's where it's a combination of capital outlay for the more minor repairs. Otherwise, we're dependent on bonds at this point. The long-term goal would be to start pulling some of the technology back to capital outlay, but to do that, I've got to get those maintenance and custodial salaries out, and there isn't room in the operating fund right now to do so. So right now, they're funded through bond issues.
When we talked about the 140 certified licensed staff who are leaving due to attrition, that's attrition, not part of the layoffs. That was the clarifying question.
There is a handful of layoffs in that, like 4, I believe, but the rest is through attrition.
This is a question about the bond. Again, why did we advertise the bond as creating jobs?
Is what?
As creating jobs?
It's creating jobs in the community was that economic impact study from the construction workers that come here. It creates those jobs and they spend money that creates sales tax for the community. It doesn't create money, jobs for us.
Okay. Question back to the National School Lunch Program.
Yes.
Is it possible for our schools now to reach back out to families to encourage them to fill out the free and reduced lunch form? Is it too late?
It's not too late, and we need it bad next year because it would have been far worse this year, but you're able to carry over some applications from the previous year. If people don't fill out that application this year, it's going to go from $1 million problem to a $3 million problem. So yes, we're going to be starting early again, encourage everyone to apply. We can't make it mandatory. That suggestion has always come up, like, why don't you make him do it in order to get registered? You can't make this particular process mandatory by federal law.
A question about our DEI and SEL programs, how much they cost yearly.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to put that out there.
Okay.
I don't know. On a $500 million budget, I don't know the 28,000 line items that are in it. I apologize.
This is related to para positions that have gone unfilled. With those positions continue to be open and able for hiring if SPED numbers remain stable.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
This is about para positions that have gone unfilled. With those positions continuing to be open and able for hiring if SPED numbers remain stable.
Yes, they are open. We did a reduction of vacancies. We already lowered that number, but we still aren't filling the ones we have. Those are some of the positions that are going to remain for people to fill.
You've talked about that. Where do funds go from JCCC for College Now students?
Where do the funds go?
From College Now.
Oh, that we get from College Now? They go into the district and support various programs. I'd have to see exactly which ones.
What happens if the Kansas bill legislature passes the bill that allows students to transfer districts?
Now, that goes to that point about recruiting students. I don't know that we'll be recruiting. Some could leave, some could come. Honestly, I'm not picking on special ed. That's my greatest concern is we have a phenomenal program. And I think it's one of the challenges that school districts that have really good special ed programs are going to have if we have an open enrollment process across Kansas.
Related to special education, wouldn't it cost money to bring someone in to evaluate how to support more students in special education?
Okay, absolutely. I can try to make it contingent on the savings they find. That's one avenue to do. If they don't find anything, then no. Otherwise, we want an independent look at it to help us find the savings. Not everything in the budget will absolutely cease. We may have to spend some money on some studies to help get after some of those other items long term, or our board may choose not to do that.
Okay, this is a clarification question related to the National School Lunch Program. How can we double dip on lunch money? Why do parents need to apply if the feds are paying for everyone?
They're paying for, they don't apply for National School Lunch Program anymore. In order to get at-risk funding in Kansas, they must use this home economic survey application. It asks a few questions. That replaces the National Lunch Program as the indicator of a free or reduced student for at-risk funding purposes. If this all comes back, which as of right now, National School Lunch Program's back, I think we're going to have the opposite problem. Many families won't know it's back. They're going to assume their child's going to eat free next year. They're not going to do the paperwork. And not only will they have to pay for lunches, the at-risk funding won't be there. So that's why it's going to be imperative to get the word out.
Have you considered and made room for the inflation that keeps increasing monthly in the operating costs?
Yes, there is. The bigger thing we're watching is construction costs. One of the reasons we're trying to accelerate all our construction schedules. It's much more impacting than our other funds, but yes, we put in a CPI adjustment.
Can you clarify what weightings were lost with the OVS students and why they don't count
anything
as...
from actually special ed, at-risk, bilingual. Beyond that, I'd have to look and see if they picked up any of the other ones.
And then why do they not count the same as
It's just the way virtual funding was set at a flat amount, and you do not get the weightings on a virtual student.
Why did we not close a school or two to fix this?
That is a much longer play. It would not have fixed the entire problem, because if the kids shift to another building, you're going to increase staff. You will save on the administrative, I get that, but that's a deep conversation we've got to have with public. And capacity in some places is a little bit of an issue. It depends on where you want to close. I'm not sure we even have a school that could take a second school in it.
Are there any talks of eliminating or revamping the 21st Century Academies?
Yes, we'll be looking at those, and we were already going to be looking at those in concert with career tech initiatives.
And why did we not cut staff according to hire date across the entire district and then shift accordingly?
That's a RIF, and so when you're in the certified licensed world, we would have to do that. In classified world, we do not have to do that. So it was really a determination by administrators and others on which positions made the most sense.
Why did other districts not lose out on free and reduced lunch money like we did?
They did. Shawnee Mission lost about the same amount we did. I know that one. I'd have to call my counterparts everywhere else.
In the future, where can we find out information about the budget?
On our website, I believe there's a budget tab down off to the right side. Otherwise, you can go to the Business and Finance Department, and it'll also, at the top, and under Departments, it'll also connect you to budget information.
Are we properly bonded for lawsuits that have been litigated?
Properly bonded. We don't really bond. That's not really what bonding would be for. So that's where I talked about that special liability fund, that if we're sued, that we can utilize that to assist, and that's where I mentioned the tort limits of $250,000.
This is a question about Clearwater Creek. Is it possible to add on to Clearwater Creek since another school won't be built anytime soon to relieve their numbers?
It's definitely a possibility, but actually that's a building that we're looking at whether or not we need to split as we come out of this particular bond. So there are some adjustments we can do to assist with their enrollment if it really continues to grow at this pace.
Okay. And then can you explain how the budget impacted summer school?
We had some Esser funds to help us in the first year for summer school trying to get some of the learning loss back. And then we changed our model to buildings know what their students need most, and so we went into more individualized budgets, but they were reduced from, because we didn't have the Esser funds behind them in this year.
Okay, I just have a couple more questions for you. On the pie chart of certified salaries that you mentioned earlier, can you clarify how many of these staff work directly in classrooms and how many serve in more of a consultation role? Or is that something for the FAQ page?
FAQ page, because
Okay.
I'd like to break that one down.
Okay. And then question about how many cuts were made at the admin level?
Just administrators?
It said how many? Ed Center, IRC.
Yeah, that's where it was the $1.5 million between IRC and Ed Center district level supported administration.
And then I just have two questions. One is, can you talk about the money that was spent on surprise and delight?
No, I can't, honestly. I have to take a look. We do have some funding sources that are non-tax revenue
I think the
that are afforded. Is that the foundation? I assumed.
Okay, and then final question. How can we help as a community?
How can you help? Number one is that free and reduced application or home economic survey. Also, as we start to reach out to the public in this next year for some of these more programmatic and deeper decisions, be involved in that process. Okay,
Okay,
that it?
I think that's
All
what we
right,
have.
thank you. Oh. I'm sorry? I can't hear you.
Sorry, a reminder about the FAQ page.
Oh, okay, yes, I'm sorry. If we didn't get to a question, go ahead, if it's submitted. Our process is going to be submit through here so we can collect them. We will respond. I promise you we will respond. In some vein, whether it's on an FAQ or not. Okay, ask me a question. Go ahead, ask me.
Thank you. Raise your hand.
Yes, sir.
I have a three-sided one. Busing,
Busing.
okay? Why so many? Neighborhood schools,
Okay.
with the exception of some of the larger schools, Cedar Creek, and some of them that are out on the fringes. Everybody, all the schools, I'd say a mile, and you see a lot of buses, you see 3 or 4 or 5 buses. Second part of that, why are there so many? I'm on assisted transportation, taxis and such. Especially if it's, again, neighborhood schools.
If you have to transport anybody over 2 miles, we also have some safety variances. When I mentioned about adjusting bell times to get to a 3-tier bus system, we run a 2-tier bus system right now. So we could eliminate a lot of buses if we could get to a 3-tier, which means 1 bus delivers elementary, loops back, gets the middle. The assisted transportation is more in the special education realm. They're better equipped than some of the yellow buses for that.
Can I have one last part of that?
Sure.
My observation on the taxi assisted, very seldom did I see a special needs person get out of it. My third part is transportation. And this has bugged me for quite a while. The 21st century program, transportation.
I don't want to speak for when those were created, but my assumption is because freshmen are involved, because they declare which academy they're going into, they're not necessarily at driving age. Something we could definitely be looking at as we look at how do those academies evolve. Eventually, could they be a no transportation provided or not?
I've been a district employee family for over 25 years. I have to, my children have not attended middle school in our town where we live. We were responsible for getting my students to school. 21st century program, as great as it may be, is a choice. You make a choice, you commit to it, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. If they want to go to Harbor Creek and go to the ones at Olathe Northwest, pay for it or drive yourself or, prepare for your responsibility.
Yeah.
My question was submitted, but not
Okay.
read. Transparency is a topic we heard last week in the board meeting that was censored, and it's also being heard today. I guess I'm an OVS parent. If we knew the school was going to be dead in the months of January, February, and March, I'm just going solely based on the feed that we have on social media for the district. How many bond ones do you think were there versus how many of, hey, check out OVS? There was none for OVS. There was 3 for the bond. That's not transparent. Instead of spending money on, having organizations come in and look at things, how about we do a full line audit? How about we dig into the bucket? Instead of looking at 3 buckets, what's in those buckets?
We
I'd love to see
have,
it.
we have an annual, we have 3 audits a year on our books, so,
They're not line audits. We
Okay.
want to see the details of what's going on. I mean, I'm the one without my kid's school is closed. You're up there saying, well, we could look at closing schools. You already did. All right? My child is not an ESL child. They're the $5,000 child, right? The ones that went from B students to A students, and you guys are killing the program. If you said $1.3 million or a little over $1 million would be easy to find. That's what you said during this presentation from another portion of your discussion. Isn't that about what we're short?
it's also, okay, I appreciate your comment.
I'm just asking. Isn't that, we can't find, I mean, that's 0.25% of the $500 million
For-
we have, right?
I
We
understand,
can't find that?
I understand your position.
And we're going to close the first school in our history, in our district's history. That's sad. A line item audit would be wonderful. Not a good look.
I appreciate concern. Losing $3 million in the first year of a school, looking for alternatives for that. There 315 students in that school, and I understand we have some small elementaries, and we'll be looking at how can we make that more efficient. It just was not sustainable in the first year. It did not meet any of the enrollment or funding or anything that was anticipated. Yes, ma'am.
So we asked about the DEI and the SEL, how much it costs per
Yes.
year to the district.
Yes.
That was not answered.
And I told you I would get that answer for you.
Did she answer it?
No, she can't look it up right here. I have to go back and run.
You want me to answer the question on the DEI? How much does it cost? There's no program that supports DEI. We run our own program. We don't have a separate curriculum to say that. A couple of our employees are funded through federal funds, like the migrant workers, that's what they do.
So is the whole DEI program free?
What, 10
Federal,
people?
federally funded?
You know what 10 people there are?
Marquise, Eric,
And G, that's 3, not 10.
you did the presentation, you were all there, and I sworn you watched it.
You're talking about,
in the bucket?
you're talking about our,
Operating funds, operating funds. But it's not DEI.
yeah, our interpreters don't fall under DEI.
No, I'm just like, we're kind of asking,
No, I'm not,
dug
I'm
into
not.
those buckets.
Yes.
DEI be a line item, that's kind of a yes or no. If it's a no,
Our Department of Diversity would be,
right, so that's what we're asking, how much is that costing the district?
and that's where I'm saying I would have to go look. I don't know the entire department cost.
Hey, John, I think we have time for 2 more questions.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
How many people actually use secondary libraries or consulted before you determined that they were just resources?
That was a discussion among senior staff and principals in trying to evaluate. I, no. No. Yes.
Will there be traveling specialists at the elementary level next year, or will elementary specialists at smaller buildings run a risk of going from 1.7 to lower?
I don't know that we've looked at anything with traveling specialists changing how that works. No, not that I'm aware of. That being said, every time we start a school year, there are some tweaks and adjustments. And I said that earlier on. If we have to do, there may be some transferring that occurs and some changes, but not reductions.
Involuntary laid off because of the movement, what bucket does that go into then? You may have to do that as an elected taxpayer. What bucket would that have to go in? You pay an unemployment assistance benefit to those involuntary laid off?
There would be unemployment. We pay that in as part of a payroll tax. But we're trying to find other positions within the district in the other vacancies, so they don't have to leave the district. Right. Mm-hmm. Time? Okay. Thank you.